So it's very nice to be here. I think I have some notes. I have 7 minutes to try and follow those incredible talks we just had and make some remarks. So I thought I would say three things. One about process, one about the particular context that we're in right now, and one about practice. And I think, where are we? Oh, there we are. So firstly about process, because I think this idea of shaping and understanding ownership is about imagination, it's about ideas, and it's about a particular sort of idea that we might be then able to move into practice, because I think we're here, as you talked about, Matt, because we want to kind of make things different in the concrete every day. And this obviously is not going to happen if we work in the way that we have always worked. In order to make that happen, we need to kind of have very different tools and we need to collaborate in very different ways. And so this kind of very famous quote from Audre Lorde has driven my own work for about the last 30 years. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with it. And I'm an activist and I'm a practitioner, and as Matt said, I work on social systems. And my work really is to make new forms of support available to families, to older people, to young people, to design systems collaboratively that break the mold of 20th century industrial welfare, which actually, I don't normally talk about it in that kind of way, but it is a form of ownership. You know, 20th century welfare has a very dominant model about how we should live, who owns the professional knowledge, what I can do to you, and so on. And so kind of, you know, thinking about breaking those norms is a kind of a form of ownership, I think. And to make that happen, we need really different tools to kind of harness things differently. And so I started thinking about kind of process 30 years ago. This is work that I did living in the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, where I first of all worked with artists in really sort of non-artistic ways, as you can see, to think about how do we use the visual as a really important tool to kind of challenge how we see kind of structures and institutions. And then coming back to Britain, I kind of started to work with designers because I realized that, you know, like pebbles and things in my pocket kind of needed a bit more sophistication, that people would not think I was actually mad and they might kind of collaborate with me. But the tools I'm talking about, I think, have to do three things. So the first is, I think the visual is like a way into the imagination. This is so different from a kind of rhetorical question and answer. I mean, for me, the classic of that is the focus group, where you literally, in my imagination, have a kind of fisherman standing on the side of the pond, peering down, casting in, extracting something, and taking it back somewhere else. So what I'm kind of engaged in is how do we build kind of tools that really enable us to create things. I think that when I do my work, people might come with some ideas, but what happens is what we're collaboratively creating in that moment. And I think also that these tools have to get to emotion. I think what's really critical is that, especially in my work, I'm working in conditions where things are very often shameful. I think that I'm working where we need kind of really deep creativity that Matt kind of alluded to, and that is a kind of emotional sort of texture. And so I'm kind of looking for ways of working which get those emotions out in a way that feels comfortable and becomes a source of the creativity. And then I want ways of working that are collective, because I think if we don't start kind of creating new structures from a collective position, if we start as individuals and then come together, then we're still going to have that kind of individual model of ownership. So tools that we can take apart, reuse in our hands, I think that is the kind of beginning of rethinking ownership. The second thing I wanted to say was about context. So my current work is framed through three lenses: technology, ecology, and justice. And I call that Revolution 5.0, and obviously the three issues are kind of deeply entangled and imbricated within each other. But just to say something today, particularly about technology, I kind of root my work, and that's the periodization, in the kind of brilliant analysis of a British Venezuelan economist called Carlota Perez, who some of you might know. She's incredible. And she has done this work plotting what she sees as 5 technology revolutions through history. And what she sees in this kind of plotting is a pattern whereby what happens is you have a new technology, starting with the canals and the railways. You have this incredible excitement. You have a bubble. And then the bubble bursts, which happened with the railway, the canals, the dot-com boom. And then what happens is that you have this period of tremendous instability. You have kind of growing deep inequality. You always have political populism. You basically have this kind of very, very uncertain ground that everybody is standing in, which I'm sure sounds familiar to everybody here today. And traditionally what's happened is that some form of cataclysm has kind of changed the conditions. In fact, just as you were referring to earlier, Matt, that, you know, it has been war, where something steps in, changes changes the grounds, where at least kind of on the surface we can begin to kind of relook at institutions and structures. So I'm very interested in this because I'm very interested in hopefully avoiding the cataclysm, that's something I haven't got time to talk about, but I have got ideas on. But how are we going to kind of rethink institutions now in that period, and thinking about kind of how technology frames that moment? But also I think what's really interesting as a kind of social lens, social activist person, when I look at this analysis, is that in every technology revolution, we rediscover things that were discarded in the last, or basically the one previous. And I think the big thing that we have rediscovered in this technology revolution is the idea of commoning. And you see it in the kind of retake-up of intellectual ideas, kind of like the Ostrom ideas. You see it in the fact that kind of right from the beginning, and I agree that in quite sort of questionable ways, but the idea of sharing was kind of always there. And so, you know, it's something within the kind of DNA, within the culture of this technology, which even if we're not kind of using it in quite the right way at the moment, I think the idea of the commons is there as a kind of real opportunity space. So then thirdly, that leads me to practice. So my work at the moment is about the future of work. And I have been running the Work Project for the last 3 years, working with workers in post-industrial places in Britain, more recently in the US, grave diggers, nuclear weapon makers, lawyers, global consultants, you name it, carers, nurses. I have pretty much worked with everybody. And I asked 2 questions. The first question is, with a kind of small pack of playing cards, you see some nurses here, what are the ingredients of a good working life in this century? And the second one is, what new form of institution do we need to get us to that kind of new form of work? And to do this, I just simply give people, these are kind of visual methods, I give people in small groups a paper tablecloth, pens, magazines, and I basically ask them to kind of create an institution on a tablecloth. And like with this group here, who are, these are kind of municipal workers, what happens is that they're not used to kind of doing this, but always something very creative happens, which I can hear the bell ringing. So I think, does that mean I have to stop now, or I have 2 minutes? I have to stop now, I have to wrap up. Well, let me just kind of make some kind of conclusions out of this, which is kind of what I want to say about today, which is in all these very different places, with these very different people across geography, age, walks of life, the same ideas come back. And I wanted to say a bit more, but I will just kind of dwell on 2 of them. So one is that I think we could characterize, like as Marx did, 20th century work as a form of deep splitting between the hand, the heart, and the body, and actually where we lose ownership of ourselves. And what has happened again and again in these kind of imaginative workshops is that people have reimagined 21st century work as a kind of re-ownership of the work, but also of ourselves and the kind of different parts of ourselves and how we kind of reintegrate, which is really interesting. This is a group in Detroit doing that work. And then the other thing is that what has emerged on the tablecloth, this is a group of janitors in Baltimore, is a new form of organization which I would describe as a mutual. And so again, nobody uses the words mutual. This is not a kind of context in which people are kind of thinking like we are today and kind of in an articulate way. People have not been asked these questions before. But I think it is really interesting that what comes out is a kind of recommoning of the work, a kind of recommoning of the economy, really deep ideas about how that works and how work fits within that. And then always at the center of them, a recommoning of ourselves, like how we think of ourselves and kind of how we think of well-being and flourishing within that kind of bigger context. Okay, I think I have to leave it there, even if I could say much more, but thank you. Over to Indy.